Well, greetings, amazing students, and welcome to this week. Welcome to our lecture for GST 060 Academic Success Seminar. Thank you for joining me. I am excited to deliver this content for you this week. I know this has been a long semester, and so I'm hopeful that this message for you this week will be one of inspiration and be something to equip you, right, to prepare yourself emotionally for the coming final weeks of the semester. I'm going to go ahead and bring up my PowerPoint here and share that with you. Keep in mind for our journal this week, you'll be sharing your thoughts and what resonated with you regarding this week's content. So that is going to be the goal for today. So our lecture is really going to be drawing upon this notion of how you, as the student, can draw upon stories that inspire you. Now, this word inspire comes from the Latin root word inspiratio. And inspiratio literally means to breathe life into, or to breathe into, to breathe upon. And I thought this is really fitting. I'm going to stop my screen for a second so you can see me. It's really fitting for a couple of reasons. One is because this notion of breathing life into, I think we can all resonate with at this moment in time. You have been through a very busy semester. It has not been easy, and yet you have persisted in the midst of multiple deadlines, familial obligations, and all of these other things. And in the coming weeks, you're going to have even more deadlines and assignments to complete in order to finish out the semester strong. If this were a race, I can imagine we'd all be feeling a little winded at this point, a little tired, and we can all use a little bit of inspiration for someone to breathe life into us to tell us, hey, finish that race, right? And so that's the goal for today. So the goal for today is to provide you with a little content to tap into inspiration and to remind you to keep going, right? Even though I know it can be an exhausting race. So that's the goal for today. Now for today, what I would like to do is share a story with you. Let me move my head out of the way here so you can see okay. And the story comes to us from the 1968 Olympics, which was actually held in Mexico City. There's a gentleman on the screen here. His name is John Stephen Aquari. Okay, and John Stephen Aquari was a marathon runner. And the story around this, I think, fits well with this notion of inspiration. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'd like you to take a mental note of John Aquari here. I'd like you to take a mental note of how he looks, right? He's tired, right? He's a marathon runner, like I said. So he's completed 26.2 miles. And if you notice, there's a bandage on his leg. And if you notice, there's only a small crowd that's still left in this giant stadium of the Olympics in 1968. I want to share a story with you about Aquari. And as I'm sharing the story, I'm going to ask you to please close your eyes, right? And imagine the story unfolding in front of you as I read it, okay? So let's do that really quickly. So let me tell you the story of John Aquari. It won't take very long. So during the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City, the Olympic marathon had been won. It was over. Ethiopian runner Mamo Wolde had taken the gold and received his praise, right? So he was out. He got his prize. He was excited. Everyone was cheering. And some of the crowd left. But there were others that remained and waited for the last participants to finish. An hour passed by, and it was beginning to become cool and dark outside. And as spectators began to leave, thinking the last runners had completed their race, sirens could be heard entering the stadium gates. Picture yourself standing there with this small crowd in this giant stadium, and you can see these sirens, right? And ambulances entering the stadium gates. This small crowd stayed to watch one last runner, John Stephen Aquari, that gentleman that was in the picture from Tanzania, past the finish line. He had fallen and injured himself during the race and was bandaged and bleeding as he completed his 26.2 miles. The crowd stood and cheered for him as he finished the race, and he limped from the finish line. And as he limped from the finish line, a reporter asked him why he chose to finish the race rather than just quit, since he had obviously had no chance of earning the medal. Aquari quietly stood there and replied to the reporter, "My country did not send me to Mexico City to start the race, right? They sent me to Mexico City to finish the race. They sent me to finish the race." Now, I wanted to draw on this story in particular. Let me bring the slide back up of Aquari, because I think in some way we can all relate to Aquari's situation, right? He was fighting a battle that he had already lost. He had started his race out strong, Life had thrown a curveball at him. It was unexpected and it was painful. And it flat out took his dreams away of competing and winning an Olympic gold medal. He was injured, right? His dream, as so he thought, or others thought, was over. But Aquari did something different. Instead of quitting, right, and choosing to walk away from his dream, he remembered the commitment that he had set out for, right, that God had placed in front of him. And that was to finish the race, not just to start it. I think about all of the challenges that you have endured over this past semester. Some of you have told me stories of the challenges you have encountered both with your family, your friends, academics, professors, on and on. And at the same time, you have continued to run your race. Some of you may be battered and bruised. Some of you may be in pain, right? And the idea is, though, you continue to run this race because you didn't sign up to just start at CBU. You started your studies to complete them, all right, and cross that stage, cross that finish line with your degree. I want to commend you on that. And I want to let you know that in these times of adversity, it's these types of stories that we draw in to inspire, to give us breath to continue to run our own race. That's one story I wanted to share with you. Now, the second story is the story of what I call the cracked pot, the cracked pot. And it's a really inspiring story. It's an old one. Some of you may have heard this story before, but if it's okay, I'd like to share another story with you. And then I've got a scripture verse for you as some ways for you to maybe draw into your own inspiration as you complete your studies this semester. And so I'm going to take this down. I'd like you again, do me a favor and please close your eyes. And I'd like to read to you the story of the cracked pot. Okay. I'd like you to picture this. And as you're listening to the cracked pot, think about who you might be in relation to what you're going through in your life in this story. So there was an elderly Chinese woman who had two large pots, each hung on the ends of a pole, which she carried across her back. One of the pots had a crack in it, while the other pot was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water. And at the end of the long walks from the stream to the house, the cracked pot arrived only half full. For full 2 years, this went on daily, with the woman bringing home only 1.5 pots of water. Now, of course, the perfect pot was proud of its accomplishments, but the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfection and miserable that it could only do half of what it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be a bitter failure, it spoke to the woman one day at the stream. The cracked pot said, "I am ashamed of myself because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to your house." The old woman smiled at the cracked pot and she said, "Did you notice that there are flowers on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I've always known about your flaw. So I planted seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walked back, you watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate the table. Without you being just the way you are, there would not be this beauty to grace my house." Each of us has our own unique flaw, right? But it's the cracks and the flaws we each have that make our lives together so very interesting and so very rewarding. I'd like to remind us of this last line in the story. Without you being just the way you are, there would not be this beauty to grace this house. Okay. So you can go ahead and open your eyes again, and I'm going to start sharing the screen here. And I'd like for you to think about who you were in this story. For some of us, maybe we're the old woman, right? We're carrying the water to and from the well every day, right? It's hard work, but we know it's for a purpose, and so we continue on in our lives. Some of us may be blessed, right, to live a life where there's no cracks in our pots, right? There's no crack in our side. There's no trauma that has occurred maybe in our lives, though we know of others who have experienced that. But I think many of you, like myself included, are a cracked pot. Most of us, we've got flaws, we've got cracks, imperfections in our side from the miles we walked and the trauma, right, that we've endured, right, from the weight that we've held onto in our lives. And at times we can feel less than others. We look at other people, other pots, right, on the shelf, and we say they're so perfect. I can't see any flaws in them. They must be doing exactly what they were created to do. Why can I only do half, right, of what everyone else can or seem to can? And I want to remind us, one, most of us, if not all, we're all cracked pots. We all have those imperfections. And that it's God who is able to transform our pots, our cracks in our pots, into something beautiful, something with a purpose, just like the crack pot in the story experienced. It's God who takes our tests, right, and transforms them into testimonies that will inspire others, right, to pursue their purpose in their lives. I want you to know that even though it seems in those moments that you're spilling over, right, and you can't do what you believe others are capable of doing, God still has a plan for you. He's repurposing all of those imperfections, those cracked pots, to grace the beauty of his table, which means the beauty of all of us, right, interacting with one another on a daily basis, right? That's the second story of inspiration I'd like to share with you this week. Finally, one of the most beautiful stories that I find of inspiration comes from this story in scripture of the woman who bled for 12 years. And this comes from Luke chapter 8, verses 43 through 48. It's a very beautiful scripture verse, and I'd like to share that with you briefly. Now there was this woman, and it says it had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. And though she had spent all she had on physicians, no one could cure her. She came up behind Jesus and touched the fringe of his clothes, and immediately her hemorrhage stopped. Then Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" And when all denied it, Peter, kind of like it seems like a snarky tone, says, "Master, the crowds surround you and press on you." Like, duh, don't you know someone touched you, right? You're surrounded by all these people. But Jesus says, no, no, no. Someone touched me, for I noticed that power had gone out of me. It was intentional. Someone reached out to me and touched me in faith, and he felt that, right? When the woman saw that she could no longer remain hidden, it goes on to say she came to Jesus trembling, and she fell down before him, and she declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." If there's one story to draw inspiration on in this time, one story to breathe life into us in the midst of a difficult time, it's this story. This woman wasn't running a race, right? She was simply trying to survive. And we learn a lot from this woman's social status in society based on this story. This was a woman who bled for 12 years. 12 years she had this medical condition of bleeding. Now, in the days of Jesus' time, if a woman was bleeding, she was seen as unclean. The fact that she was a woman in and of itself meant that she was in the lower rungs of society. She was an outcast. We even see in the story, it says she came up behind Jesus and touched his fringe. This woman was literally on the outskirts of the crowd. She was on the outside. She wasn't in the mix, right? She was chasing Jesus to catch up to her. And it says, or to catch up to him. And it says in this story, she had spent all she had on physicians, but no one had cured her. This woman spent all of her money. She was a social outcast. She was chasing Jesus in order to be healed, right? And she's coming up to him in desperation. How many of us have felt like that? We have exhausted time, resources, energy. Our bodies may hurt, our spirit may hurt, and yet we are seeking Jesus in that hope that he will see us, right? Something beautiful happens in the story. Jesus not only sees this woman, he feels this woman, the connection. The moment this woman touches Jesus' cloak, she is healed instantly, and Jesus turns around and calls her daughter. Daughter. Interesting, right? He doesn't just call her woman. He doesn't just call her, hey, person, hey, you. He recognizes her as a daughter of creation and says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Jesus did two things in this story with this woman's faith. He cured her, right, of her disease. That's one thing. Her body was restored. Her health was restored. But it goes on to say, your faith has made you what? Well. It goes deeper, right, than the notion of just being healed physically. Your faith has made you well. It has made you complete, okay? Many of us, we look for that temporary fix in the midst of adversity, right? When we're stressed out, we may do something, right, that calms us down in the moment. But once that moment passes, we may still feel desperate, just like this woman. It's only a short-term fix. What I draw from an inspiration in this story is that Jesus makes us well. He addresses the wholeness of us, and he sees us right on for who we are. This woman had everything, lost everything over the course of 12 years. And in a moment of desperation, she reached out with her faith. Jesus not only meets her needs, her physical needs, but says, your faith has also made you well. You're whole, right? As a result of this. And as a result of being made well, guess what? You can go in peace, right? You're good now. You're fine, right? And so I wanted to share this story because I know that at times it may feel like we're running behind. There's never enough time. There's never enough money. We always worry about money, especially in college for tuition and books and gas money, right? Some of you have family members that you're helping to support, babysitting, and all of these other things you're doing. Some of us may feel on the outside like we're on campus, but we don't really belong because you're a commuter student or whatever the case is. Some of you may say, I live on campus, but I'm first generation. I've never been to college before. No one in my family has been to college before. And I just feel like I'm always trying to catch up. Jesus knows your position in life. He knows exactly what you're going through, and he knows exactly how to make you well, right? In these moments where you may feel like you're at your weakest at this point in your race in the semester, know, right, that you can reach out to Jesus and he can give you that peace that only he can give. So that's the other story that I wanted to leave you with. These three stories of inspiration. As we wrap up our lesson for this week, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'd like you to take a moment to reflect upon these points, okay? What was that moment? If you could think back in time, what was that moment in your life when you felt God called you to your chosen major and career? So, if I remember correctly, we've got students who are theater students, music, aviation, pre-nursing, right? Psychology. We've got quite a few other students. If I left one of those out, I apologize, but I see you, okay? And I want to ask you, what motivates you to persist? Like, so this is actually Stephen Aquardi, right? But Stephen Aquardi. And also, I'd like us to keep in mind we're all crackpots. What flaws do you believe you have that sometimes cause you to doubt yourself? Think about those. Remember that moment, that exercise we did on the board where you wrote down those things that prevent you from asking for help when you need them, right? Those are those cracks in the pot. And consider that God constantly repurposes our flaws into successes and turns our tests into testimonies. So I'd ask you in these final weeks of the semester, what obstacles are in front of you? And as you continue to persist in your studies and your life goals, I'd like you to identify one quote, one scripture, one message of hope that you will keep asking or seeking Jesus for in your goals, like the woman in this scripture. And I'm going to ask you, put that scripture verse, that quote, whatever it is, that message of inspiration in your journal entries for me to read this week. Okay, so there's your Easter egg. If you're looking for what you're going to address in your journal, it's your takeaways from the lecture today. You're going to put that scripture or that verse or that quote in there, all right, for you to remember. And you're going to share that with me, and then you'll answer the other reflections that are on the journal instructions, okay? So I want to thank you all so very much for persisting with your studies this week. You know how to get a hold of me if you need anything. Thank you all so much. God bless.